Alright, my name's Ahmad Harajli. This is Jake Turner, Seth, Blevins. We're strength and conditioning interns at Intern University and around McKeefery. We'll be talking about unilateral versus bilateral training, emphasizing more on the lower body. Alright, so we got two controversial debate going here. Big debate here is we got the squat, which is a big foundational movement, across the whole world, basically in strength and conditioning, and we got the rear foot elevated split squat, which is very been popularized by Mike Boyle. So we're just gonna talk about that a little bit.
So one of the big terms we're going to use a lot is bilateral deficit. All right. So it's basically, since we're talking about the lower body, it's going to be, leg A, whatever leg that happens to be, the strength of that doing a one-legged exercise, plus the strength of limb B, left or right, whatever, added together is going to be more than if you were to do, both legs together. So one-legged squat, do both legs, add those together will be more than just a regular two-legged back squat. So bilateral training. All right, there are pros and cons of everything. So one of the pros, heavy loaded movements. All right, you can load up the bar, you get a lot of weight on your back. You get a greater percentage of musculature, using many more muscles doing a bilateral. Okay. You get prime movers, your legs got some major movers in them. All right, cons, asymmetry and risk of injury. You're loading 500-600 pounds, whatever your max is on a squat. It's a lot of weight, can cause a lot of injuries.
Okay, these are the pros and cons for unilateral training. The first one is probably the biggest case that most people use for unilateral training, is that it's more functional than bilateral training. When we look at athletes and how they perform in competition, they're mainly on one leg, whether it be a basketball player shooting a layup, whether it be a pitcher throwing a pitch, or just a simple walking and running pattern. They're definitely on one leg more, so it makes sense to train on one leg. The second one, we have injury reduction and injury rehab. Training on unilateral training evens out imbalances. So like when a player tears their ACL and he's coming off an ACL injury, unilateral training will even out that imbalance and it'll help them recover, which is also big for females. Females are more susceptible to ACL injuries than males are, so unilateral training is really important for female athletes. The third one, it improves asymmetries, or it evens out those imbalances. The stabilizers, when you're doing a bilateral exercise, you have the loop is closed from the floor to your legs, so you got a U shape, so the floor is helping you stabilize. But when you get up on one leg, it opens up that loop and it forces you to use muscles that are kind of dormant in bilateral training. Like you'll use your adductor group, you'll use your glute med to stabilize in unilateral training, and greater core activation. When you're on one leg, you really engage those deep core muscles and those stabilizers I talked about. And the cons is just that you can't do as heavy as load with unilateral.
Alright, so this is a graph I got here from research done in 2012 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning research. Alright, so basically it's comparing the back squat and the rear foot elevated split squat. So what they're comparing this one's the muscle activity. So you see in the black, we've got the bilateral movement, which is back squat, and the gray is rear foot elevated split squat. Basically showing pretty close muscle activity going to all the major prime movers. And also, they also tested the testosterone response to it. Actually, in the unilateral movement, actually showed that it has a little higher, but it's relatively close, so it's not that big of a deal. But at least it shows us that we can use the single leg movements as an alternative. When we got guys who are hurting, bad backs, stuff like that. Just because not everybody can do a back squat with a good form. I mean, we just gotta have an alternative for things. And also, excuse me, basically,
so saw this video from Eric Cressy, talked about how the RDL versus a deadlift is a much less of a bilateral deficit than a back squat to a rear foot elevated squat. All right. So, like I said, lower deficit. It's lower because you can't load up as much on one leg and do an RDL, and it's better for athletes. So, it's a smaller deficit, and so it doesn't hurt as much. So, got some questions.
We just kind of want to open it up for discussion now. Our first question that we have here is, do you favor one type of training, unilateral or bilateral?
I think a solid combination of the two is ideal. I feel that bilateral training has weight as well as unilateral training, especially when talking about sport specific.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to do both too, because there's carryover between the two. So I think it's important to balance the two as well.
Does anybody really favor one side or the other? I mean,
Is there a, going with this, is there a specific sport that you would, do one-legged more often than two-legged or bilateral?
Sprinting. I think sprinting, just because they're going to be pushing off of one leg more. They almost never push off of both legs. Especially when they start. Exactly. So I think sprinting is one example that screams that.
can't you say most sports though are from one leg to another?
The majority, but sprinting more so than anything else I can think of.
I do a lot of unilateral training with my baseball pitchers too. I mean, just from a balance and stability perspective, it helps them out a lot. I mean, usually in other sports, in football and things like that, when you're running the transition, it's a lot quicker for pitchers. They're physically bringing that leg up in the air and they're holding it. Other pitchers even pause. So, just from a stability standpoint, it helps out with my guys a lot, especially, exercises like single leg squats and single leg RDLs, because that's the position their sport's played in.
So do you do more unilateral work with them than bilateral, or are you kind of balancing things out?
I wouldn't say I do more. I would say I make it a priority to always have some type of unilateral movement in, the lower emphasis days. I always have at least one, whether it is a rear foot elevated or a single leg RDL. I make it a point to have at least one, but not necessarily putting the emphasis on, one or the other.
And you, with baseball, because they're throwing with, obviously they're down there, do you do upper body unilateral stuff?
Yeah, I do a lot, a lot of upper body. I mean, when we do a lot of single arm rows. They actually do bench. They don't no barbell bench whatsoever. Anything, no overhead movements. But for the pressing motions that they do, they're all single arm. But yeah, so definitely.
I just want to throw this out there. Would you guys consider having a one day just emphasizing bilateral and then one day emphasizing unilateral? Would you guys, like, during the week, so let's say like a Monday we do bilateral and then just focus on Thursday we just do unilateral. What do you guys think about that?
I think it'd be good even once a week on each, where say like 1 week you do both days you do squat, the next week you do both days you do one leg, like unilateral, just to kind of keep your body off balance so you don't get used to one thing. Just mixing it up. I think that would help a lot.
Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
When is it appropriate to throw in unilateral work? I mean, what level of foundational strength do you need before implementing unilateral?
I think you got to have pretty decent bilateral strength, because the bilateral transfer is greater than the unilateral transfer. So, and like I said before, I would definitely program it with females, because of they're susceptible to ACL tears. So I'll definitely do it with them. Like Zach said, sprinters.
Is that somewhat subjective, athlete to athlete? I mean, as you evaluate them? Or is it a little bit more objective, where it's like, okay, well, if you can do 1.5 times your body weight, then we can have you do.
I think it's more of an athlete to athlete. I mean, especially at the college level. I mean, people are coming from all different places, all different types of training, you know, in high school. Some don't even have strength coaches. So I think it just depends, you know, their background, types of training. That'll help with, you know, if they can, those kinds of things.
I think using unilateral training first as a base, because a lot of different people, so we all at a rack can see one person at each rack that compensates one way or another, either bending at the waist, you know, letting heels come off the ground, you know, not really getting down all the way. They can compensate one way or another to get to that point where it's like, all right, you're at parallel. Unilateral movements definitely expose those. You can see like, okay, he or she is tight here, he or she is, you know, weak here, tight on the other side, and then, you know, doing a Bulgarian squat absolutely exposes that.
I tend to agree with Fred a little bit too. I mean, if you use it as your evaluation process, doing a simple walking lunge, you can see if they have a tight thoracic back, hip flexor, don't have dorsiflexion. I mean, there's a ton of things.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on what Fred and Aaron were saying. Just, you know, whether you're pro FMS or not, let's say you don't do the FMS or don't do any type of assessment. Unilateral training is a great way. It'll show it. You know, it comes out pretty easy, especially with the asymmetries. Which Randy talking about baseball with a very asymmetrical sport. Unilateral training will absolutely expose that. You'll see the dominant side, and it's a good opportunity to help balance out that asymmetry. So with your asymmetrical sports or athletes that have one dominant side, unilateral training is absolutely essential. It doesn't mean that you take away bilateral movements. Those are still essential, just like any program, they're going to be your base, but unilateral exercises absolutely have to be incorporated with asymmetrical athletes because you have to give them the opportunity to balance that asymmetry out. And it tells you, it gives you an opportunity as a coach to say, okay, this person really needs to work on that because you'll see those flaws come out.
I like what you guys said about unilateral training is going to expose dormant muscles or stabilizing muscles that aren't normally activated during bilateral exercise. So, like Coach Short was saying, when's a good time to incorporate unilateral exercise? I think across the board, everyone needs a foundation with unilateral exercise. So, I kind of like what we do here. During the warm-up, we might include just some body weight unilateral exercises. So, before squat or clean, if we're doing single leg RDLs, just body weight or with a PVC. I think we need to give our athletes that base with body weight because, like Coach Fred said, you're gonna see a lot of technical errors, and it's a new movement pattern for people. Most people are gonna train bilateral, so we need to teach them that movement first. Really emphasize coaching up, correcting it before then program it in and have them do it with the load.
One of the biggest things I've noticed, like unilateral versus bilateral, is like if you consider a squat, bilateral squat, most people can do it pretty fine, but nothing terrible, coaching up really quick. Whereas if you do like a single leg elevated squat, like one of the biggest things you'll see is like their knees cave in. So one of the things I've noticed in my experiences with bilateral, like they had mentioned, you can get away with so much more. I think glutes are like one of the most underactivated muscles when it comes to bilateral training, and unilateral is so good to turn those on because if you do it correctly to drive your knees up, you need to really activate your glutes, kind of thing as an external rotator. So with any athlete, that's a really good thing, especially for like ACL prevention, things of that nature. But that's one of the biggest things I think unilateral is really good for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we're talking about movement patterns and sequencing of muscle fibers. So I think it's a necessity to have unilateral work.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the bilateral deficit, about deadlift versus squat? So can you elaborate on that, what that means with our bilateral deficit with a squat pattern and our bilateral deficit with a deadlift pattern?
Well, basically what Jake was saying. So with the squat, like with the rear foot split squat, if you do it one leg at a time, you're able to actually do more weight than you would with two legs, for most people, for the most part. With the deadlift, more than likely, that gets real close. I mean, because it's not as big as the gap as with the squat. I mean, you're probably not gonna do it with one leg at more weight total than
On the
two.
deadlift.
Yep.
Do we know why?
In the video, he talked mainly about how the deadlift, you're coming from the floor, whereas the single leg, you're going to pick it up, and there's the stretch shortening cycle, and so you're not coming from a stopped position. You're coming. There's a little bit of movement in it before it starts. So he said that makes up for the difference.
I'd say probably, I'd say maybe spinal loading, that might have something to do with it. Because, most people get deadlift a lot more than they can squat. Deadlift can pick up from the floor, squat, along at the spine, they only take as much as they can. So, we are all limited somewhat to our back. So I'd say probably that.
So let me get this straight. So if we're looking at rear foot elevated single leg squat, and I'm assuming you're talking back foot on the bench, right?
Yes, sir.
So you add up your left and your right leg, what you do, it's gonna be more than what you do.
Like,
Okay.
like I tested it yesterday myself. I did 225 for each leg. But I only maxed out 435 in the squat, so I actually did 450 total on the rear foot split squat compared to my 435 in the back squat.
So how much assistance are you getting from that back leg?
Well,
Because
the hidden numbers really. The front leg takes about 80% of your body weight, and 20% is on your back leg. So you actually put more of your own weight on that front leg compared to what you're, somewhat 50-50. Give or take a few percentages going either way in the bilateral movement. So you might be doing more weight with them.
how much would it change now if you use a different implement for your rear foot elevated? So
Different movement.
Like I like to really single out my leg when I do unilateral movements. So I would put my back foot, instead of putting it on a bench, I put my back leg on a band. So, but I know for a fact that I'm not nearly as strong when I put that back leg because I can't use my hip flexors for, any assistance whatsoever. So, wouldn't that be more of a true unilateral movement as opposed to a bench assisted one?
Yeah, that, or, you can even do it on a box, just one leg box squats, or like Steve was doing yesterday,
Yeah, pistol squats.
Pistol squats, yeah.
You can load those up with the vest and dumbbells. Going with that.
We get a slide in there talking about testosterone.
Yes.
So what is the positive of an increased testosterone response?
Well, just for the physiological changes that you get from doing the movements and, getting bigger and stronger and faster. It's just to show that, because, most people say the squat, that's, the king of the exercise, especially getting your testosterone levels up. But, it shows you right there, at least it's a start, that it's pretty similar, even though you're going on one leg using only probably 42% of the load that you would use on a back squat. So just an alternative.
How much training do you think goes into the unilateral? Because there's always the argument of the bilateral deficit, and you're stronger with one leg than you are combining them with two. But like Coach Brandy said, the rear foot elevator is probably not the best example of that. Like a pistol squat or something would be, and I think most of us in the room maybe don't train unilateral as much. Someone who could squat 500 pounds, I don't think with a pistol squat they're going to load up an extra 250 pounds onto their body and have success with that. So, and Mike Boyle, even, who's a big advocate for bilateral training, and talks about the bilateral deficit, will show videos of NFL players coming in who could squat over 500 pounds, but they can't do pistol squats with 15-pound dumbbells. And so there's some training involved in there. How much training do you think it takes for someone to really see the benefits of unilateral training and kind of get into that bilateral deficit?
That's a good question. It's a skill like anything, obviously. Like, obviously, we're used to bilateral movements. We're going to get pretty efficient at that. I mean, get close to that. I mean, probably maybe at least we got to go 3 months, consistently working at it every week and see where we can get.
I know with Mike Boyle especially, he does a lot of that unilateral training, and then even though that he cut out back squats completely, and started doing a lot of front squats, peripheral elevated, single leg stuff, he was able to get his guys up to some pretty heavy weights. I also know that he started using unilateral power and Olympic exercises, so single leg snatches, single leg cleans, things like that. And we're just using heavy weights, and he was doing a lot of that with his U.S. Women's National Hockey Team. What are your ideas on Olympic lifting and doing power exercises unilaterally?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm not really too sure about that. Honestly, I'm probably more bilateral Olympic lifts. I mean, just thinking safety and all that. I mean, I can only imagine how much weight they're using for a single leg, so you're not really getting as much power production. So, but I mean, if I'm going to work on power with single legs, I'm just going to focus for that on plyometrics. So I'm not really going to worry about Olympic lifts. I'll keep that bilateral.
We're talking about like putting it in with the athletes here, like we really don't even fully coach them up on 2 feet. So there would really wouldn't be a reason to put them on 1 foot.
I feel like doing a single arm dumbbell snatch, unilateral snatch, is beneficial just from the teaching aspect. A lot of people initially do not have proper shoulder mobility. And the dumbbell, having that single arm dumbbell, lets them get the feel of pop and the extension of their hips, and be able to balance that weight above their head instead of having to be kind of
But I agree with that. But just single leg Olympic lifts, I'm not all for that.
As far as testing, did you guys find anything if someone just did unilateral training only and then came back and tested a bilateral movement with it? Did you find anything out there that where they were able to make similar increases over, a 8-week period or something like that?
I didn't really see anything like that.
Yeah, I didn't see.
But from what I've read and seen, just from strength coaches, I mean, they've been able, I've seen guys where they go to the summer and they just train unilaterally and they come back and test their bilateral movements. Actually made some jumps, maybe 20 pounds, 30 pounds. I've seen stuff like that, but not exactly seen like research on it.
All right, guys.
That's it.
Thanks for it.
Thank you.